There are exactly three rules I live by in Busan. Don't touch strangers without gloves. Don't walk into buildings that smell like cedarwood and dominance. And absolutely, under no circumstances, never ever wander into Mapo district after midnight looking for a convenience store that sells banana milk. I broke all three in one night. My name is Seo Jiyeon. I'm 22 years old. I'm an omega, and apparently my survival instincts are tragically, embarrassingly broken. My roommate Do-hyun always says I have the self-preservation instincts of a golden retriever at a fireworks show. Honestly, fair, completely fair. It started because I was hungry. That's it. No dramatic reason, no noble cause. Pure, simple, humiliating hunger. I'd been studying for my graduate linguistics exam for 11 hours straight in my apartment on the edge of Mapo, surviving on 3 crackers and academic spite when my stomach staged a full protest. I grabbed my coat, pulled my fingerless gloves on the black ones, snug from wrist to knuckle, leaving only my fingertips exposed because I'd been too lazy to find the full ones, and walked out into the cold Busan night. The streets were mostly empty. November in Busan carries a specific kind of cold, sharp and salt-edged, blowing in off the water, cutting right through your coat like it has personal intentions. I walked 3 blocks before I realized the convenience store I always used was dark, closed. A handwritten sign on the door said renovation, and I stood there staring at it like it had personally betrayed me. That's when I smelled it. Cedarwood, dark amber. Something underneath both of those, something commanding and layered and old in a way that had nothing to do with age. It was the concentrated scent of alpha. Not one alpha, multiple. Coming from the building across the street, a place with no sign above the door, blacked out windows and 2 men outside who were definitely not hired for their conversational skills. A normal person would have turned around. I sniffed again. 3 distinct alpha signatures, all of them powerful enough to make the air feel thick. And underneath all of it, something else. Something sharp and metallic and wrong. Fear, not theirs. Someone else's coming from inside that building. Thin and desperate and unmistakable. This is the part where I should explain the psychometry thing. I don't talk about it. Ever. I've spent the last 4 years of my life managing it, hiding it, wearing gloves in July and lying about sensory sensitivity issues to every doctor who asked. When I touch things, objects, walls, skin, I get flashes, memories, emotions. Sometimes just impressions, like catching the tail end of a dream. Sometimes full scenes, brutal and clear. I can't control the depth or the timing. I can only control the contact. No touch, no vision. Simple rule. Effective boundary. Works perfectly as long as I don't do something monumentally stupid like reach out and steady myself against the wall of a building I have no business touching. The wall got me the moment my bare fingertips made contact. Cold stone. Then a flash, hot and violent. A man on his knees, hands bound, voice cracking with something beyond fear. Numbers spoken in a rapid, desperate string. An address. This address. A date. Tonight. And behind him a door, a specific door. 2nd floor, 4th from the left, with something on the other side that hummed with finality. A trap. Set and waiting. I yanked my hand back, pressed it against my chest, stood there breathing in the cold night air and having a very serious internal conversation with myself that went, "This is not your problem, Jiyeon. You are a linguistics graduate student. You study syntax and morphology. You do not involve yourself in whatever this is. You turn around, you go home, you eat the 3 crackers, and you sleep." I lasted about 4 seconds because the fear scent got stronger. And I am, as previously established, tragically broken when it comes to self-preservation. I didn't go inside. I'm reckless, not suicidal. Instead, I went to the larger of the 2 men standing outside broad, jaw like a cliff, arms crossed, and I looked up at him from my entirely unimpressive height of 5'8" and said in my most serious graduate student voice, "I need you to tell whoever is in charge in there that the 2nd floor, 4th door on the left, there's a problem. Tonight. And whoever is walking into it should not." The man stared at me. I stared back. I'm not joking, I said. I know how this looks. I'm wearing a coat with a broken zipper and I smell like instant noodles and poor decisions. But I'm telling you the truth. That door is a trap. He blinked once, slowly, like a very large, very confused owl. Who are you? He said. Someone who really wanted banana milk and ended up here instead. Please just pass the message. He looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not belief exactly, more like the specific confusion of a person who can't figure out what angle I was playing. I had no angle. I had cold fingers, a psychometry-induced migraine beginning behind my left eye, and a deep personal commitment to going home as soon as this was done. He spoke into the earpiece at his collar. Low. Fast. I caught 3 words omega, outside, warning before he went quiet and listened. Then his entire posture changed, and that was my first sign that I had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Not because he turned aggressive, because he stepped aside, opened the door, and said with the particular careful neutrality of a man following very specific instructions, "They want to see you." I should have run. Instead, I looked at the open door, felt the cedar wood and amber and authority rolling out of it like weather, and thought with the last functioning brain cell I apparently possessed, at least, I'm not hungry anymore. I walked inside. The door closed behind me, and somewhere deep in the building, in the particular silence that follows when powerful men stop what they're doing, because something unexpected just arrived, I heard 3 distinct heartbeats shift into attention. Not threatening, interested, which, as it turned out, was so much worse. Interested was the wrong word. I decided that approximately 3 seconds after entering the building. The hallway was long, dim, and smelled overwhelmingly of cedar wood, black pepper, and testosterone-fueled authority. The walls were bare concrete. The lighting was the specific kind of low that said we have money, but we want you nervous. 2 more men flanked the interior, both large, both watching me with the same careful neutrality as the man outside. I kept my gloved hands in my pockets. Not because I was scared. Okay, partially because I was scared, but mostly because bare finger contact with anything in this building felt like an extraordinarily bad idea, given that the wall outside had already delivered 1 psychic migraine, and I hadn't even made it past the lobby yet. The man escorting me, the large confused owl from outside, whose name I still didn't know, stopped at a staircase and gestured upward. 2nd floor. Of course, because apparently the universe wanted to confirm that yes, I was walking directly toward the exact location I'd just warned them about. Beautiful, wonderful, totally fine. You first, I said, gesturing at the stairs. He looked at me. Right, I said. Me first. Great. Love that for me. I climbed. The 2nd floor opened into a wide room that was aggressively, almost offensively, expensive. Dark wood paneling, low leather furniture, a long table against one wall with a city map spread across it, held down at the corners by what I was fairly certain were actual antique paperweights. The kind of room that said we make decisions here that affect people who will never know our names. And standing in the middle of it were 3 men. I registered them the way you register weather, not individually at first, but as a collective force. They were all tall, all late 20s, all carrying the specific density of alpha authority that makes the air feel pressurized, like the moment before a thunderstorm decides to commit. Then I looked at them individually and my brain did something deeply unhelpful, which was to notice that they were all, without exception, unfairly attractive, which was irrelevant, completely irrelevant. I filed it under not the point, Jiyeon, and kept my face neutral. The one in the center was the one my attention snagged on first, the way it always snags on whoever is generating the most gravitational pull in a room. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been assembled with deliberate, almost architectural precision. Sharp jaw, darker eyes that were currently examining me with the focused intensity of someone reading a document they didn't order but couldn't stop reading. He wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms and radiated the specific energy of a man who was always, always the most dangerous person in any room he entered. His name, I would learn, was Kang Taeju. Pack Alpha, 29 years old. and absolutely categorically the source of the cedar wood scent that had hit me on the street. To his left stood someone leaner, slightly younger looking, with sharp cheekbones and an expression that managed to be simultaneously bored and dangerously alert. He had his arms crossed and was looking at me the way someone looks at a variable they haven't accounted for in an equation they thought was already solved. His scent was the dark amber note, warmer than Taiju's, with something almost like burnt sugar underneath. Shin Yu-chan, 28, second in the pack hierarchy. I didn't know any of this yet. I was guessing from the way he stood slightly angled toward Taiju, close enough to act as extension, far enough to operate independently. The third man was standing slightly apart from the other two, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets in a posture of complete, almost theatrical ease. He was the tallest of the three, with a softer face, not soft in a weak way. Soft in the way that made it more disarming, because the intelligence behind his eyes was absolutely sharp. His scent was the third note I'd caught outside, layered and complex, something like pine resin and cold river water. Oh, Jiyeon, 27. And the one currently looking at me with the beginnings of a smile that said he found this entire situation genuinely entertaining, which immediately made me like him slightly more than the other two, and also trust him slightly less. Taiju spoke first. "You warned my man outside about a trap on this floor." His voice was low and even and carried the particular weight of someone who didn't raise it because he'd never needed to. "Explain how you know about it." I looked at him, then I looked at the door behind them. Second floor, fourth from the left, still closed, still humming with that specific wrongness I'd felt through the wall outside. "You haven't opened it yet," I said. "Answer the question." "I will, but first," I nodded toward the door. "How long has it been since anyone went in there?" Something shifted in the room, not visibly. Taiju's expression didn't change, but Yu-chan uncrossed his arms slowly, and Jaehyun's almost smile disappeared entirely. 3 hours, Jaehyun said, ignoring the sharp look Taiju sent him. "Why?" "Because whatever is behind it was set to go off tonight, and 3 hours is close enough to now that I'd strongly recommend not opening it the standard way." I kept my voice level, matter of fact. I was going for competent stranger with useful information, not terrified Omega who read your building's trauma through a wall. "Is there another access point to that room?" Silence. Taiju took one step toward me. Just one. But one step from someone with that kind of physical authority crosses about 4 times the normal amount of spatial territory. "Who sent you?" he said quietly. "Nobody sent me. I was trying to buy banana milk." Yu-chan blinked. "What?" "Banana milk. Convenience store across the street was closed. I was cold and hungry, and I touched your wall, and now I'm here. That's the whole story." Another silence. Longer this time. Jaehyun made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Taiju looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes, and said very carefully, like each word was a stone being placed with precise intention, "You touched the wall. Technically my fingertips. The gloves don't cover the tips. It's a design flaw I'm actively working on." He stared at me. I stared back. "I'm an Omega with psychometry," I said, because apparently all my filters had abandoned me tonight. "I read things through contact. I touched your wall. I saw a flash of someone setting a trap in that room. I gave you the warning, and now I'd very much like to go home." I paused. "Please." The word please landed in complete silence. Then Taiju said, "With the absolute calm of a man making a decision that would change both our lives, you're not going anywhere." I let those 4 words sit in the air between us for a moment, turned them over, examined them from multiple angles. Then I looked at Kang Taiju, Pack Alpha, 29 years old, standing there with the absolute composure of a man who had never once in his life been told no and survived the experience. And I said, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Because it sounded like you just told a stranger who voluntarily came in here to help you that he can't leave. And I want to make sure I heard that correctly before I have my crisis." Taiju didn't blink. "You heard correctly." "Fantastic." I pressed 2 fingers against my left temple, where the psychometric migraine was now blooming with genuine commitment. "Great. This is great." Jaehyun had given up suppressing the smile. It was living openly on his face now, comfortable and completely unhelpful. Yuchan was still watching me with that equation-solving expression, like he was cataloging everything I said and filing it somewhere he could retrieve later. You know something you shouldn't, Taiju said. His voice hadn't changed in volume or temperature. It was still that same low, even register. Somehow that was more unsettling than if he'd raised it. That makes you a liability until we understand what you are and who you're connected to. I'm connected to my graduate program and a crippling student loan. That's it. You identified a trap in a secured location through a wall. Yes, without any prior intelligence. Correct. And you expect me to believe that was banana milk? I stared at him. I expect you to believe it was psychometry, which I already explained, and banana milk, which was the original motivation, yes. Yuchan spoke for the first time. His voice was quieter than Taiju's, more precise, with the particular cadence of someone who chose words the way a surgeon chose instruments. Psychometry isn't common. Documented cases in omegas are less than 3% of the designation population. Verified cases are significantly lower. I turned to look at him. Are you fact-checking me right now? I'm contextualizing you. That's somehow worse. Jaehyun laughed. Actually laughed, a short, genuine sound that he didn't bother hiding. Taiju shot him a look. Jaehyun arranged his face back into something more professionally neutral, but his eyes were still lit with amusement. I decided right then that Jaehyun was the most dangerous of the three, in the specific way that warmth is dangerous, because it makes you relax exactly when you shouldn't. The door, I said, redirecting, because standing here being contextualized was not making the migraine better. Are you going to do something about it or not? Because I got a pretty clear impression of a timing mechanism, and I don't know the exact window. But I know it's tonight, and tonight is already moving. That landed differently. Taiju looked at Yuchan. Something passed between them that was entirely silent. The specific communication of people who had operated together long enough to hold entire conversations in a glance. Yuchan pulled out his phone, typed something brief. Within 60 seconds, two men appeared at the top of the stairs, and Taiju gave them quiet instructions that involved the words secondary access and thermal sweep, which were not phrases I typically encountered in my linguistic research, and yet somehow made complete sense in context. The two men moved toward the far end of the corridor without a word. Taiju turned back to me. Sit down. I looked at the leather seating arranged near the window, then back at him. Is that a request? No. I sat down, not because he told me to, because my legs were starting to register that I'd walked 3 blocks in the cold climb stairs and sustained a psychic hit, and they were filing a formal complaint. I folded my hands in my lap, gloved fingers laced together, and maintained as much dignity as the situation allowed, which was limited but present. Jaehyun dropped onto the sofa across from me with the easy comfort of someone who was entirely at home in this room. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me with that open, disarming attention. What's your name? He asked. Seo Jiyeon. How old are you, Jiyeon? 22. How old are you? 27. He said it without hesitation, which I hadn't expected. How long have you had the ability? I considered not answering, but Jaehyun had the specific quality of someone it was surprisingly easy to answer, which again was exactly why I should have been careful. Since I was 16, it came in with secondary designation. Most psychometric omegas present around that age. Can you control it? Mostly, contact is the trigger. No contact, no reading. The gloves help. I glanced at my hands. Full coverage works better. Tonight was a design flaw situation. What did you see exactly? Yuchan had moved to the chair at the end of the low table, sitting with the precise, contained posture of someone who did not sprawl anywhere under any circumstances. When you touched the wall, I looked at him. He looked back. His eyes were very dark and very steady and gave away approximately nothing, which I was beginning to understand was just his default state. A man on his knees, I said carefully. Fear sent, not one of yours. A string of numbers, this address, tonight's date, and that door. Whatever is behind it was placed with specific intent. The emotional residue was cold, calculated, not impulsive. Yuchan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Professional. That was my impression, yes. The two men returned from the corridor. One of them spoke quietly to Taiju. I watched Taiju's face and saw nothing change in his expression, but something shifted in his scent. The cedar wood went sharper, with a dark current underneath it. He looked at me with those unreadable eyes and said two words. You were right. I absorbed that, nodded once, tried not to think about what right meant in this specific context, about what had been behind that door, about whose fear I had felt bleeding through cold concrete into my fingertips. Okay, I said quietly. So, about me going home. Taiju crouched down to my eye level, slowly, deliberately, and looked at me from a distance of approximately 2 feet with an expression that was not unkind, not cruel, but absolutely, completely immovable. Jiyeon, he said, and my name in his voice did something I was choosing not to examine. You just read evidence from a crime scene through a wall. You identified a professional plant in a secured location. You are the only external person who has touched this building tonight. I waited. That means, he continued, that whoever set that trap may already know you're here. The migraine behind my left eye pulsed once, hard. Oh, I said softly. Yes, Taiju said. Oh. I sat with that for approximately 4 seconds. The migraine pulsed. The cedar wood scent pressed in from all sides. Somewhere in the building, a heating unit clicked on, and the warm air that pushed through the vents carried all three of their scents at once, layered and distinct and entirely too present for my already overworked nervous system. Then I said, okay, walk me through the logic. Taiju straightened up. You were seen outside. My man confirmed contact with you before bringing you in. If there was external surveillance on this building tonight, which there was because that trap didn't place itself, then there is a reasonable probability that you were recorded. And recorded means identified, Yuchan added from his chair, with the gentle tone of someone explaining something simple to someone they weren't yet sure was keeping up. I was keeping up. I just didn't like the destination. Which means whoever set the trap knows an unknown Omega made contact with this pack tonight, Jaehyun finished. He wasn't smiling anymore. And in their position, the first question they ask is why. I looked at all three of them in sequence. So you're telling me that I stopped to give a helpful warning, and now I'm potentially on a surveillance list belonging to people dangerous enough to plant professional traps in secured buildings? Yes, Taiju said. Because I wanted banana milk? Yes. I pressed both gloved hands over my face, took one breath, took another, then lowered them and sat up straight because I was not going to perform distress in front of three strange alphas in a building I'd walked into voluntarily like a complete disaster of a person. Fine, I said. What does staying here tonight actually mean? Define the parameters. Something moved across Taiju's expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like recalibration. The specific adjustment of someone who had prepared for one type of response and received a different one entirely. He studied me for a moment with those dark, measuring eyes. Guest room, he said. This building has a residential upper floor. You stay until we assess the external threat level and confirm whether your identity was compromised. It could be hours. It could be longer. How much longer? I don't know yet. I appreciated the honesty. It didn't make me happy, but I appreciated it. Do I get my phone? Monitored communication only. Until we know the scope of exposure, outgoing contact is a risk. My roommate will notice if I don't come home. We'll send a message from your number, a cover. I stared at him. You'll send a message from my number. A simple one. Late study session. Not unusual for a graduate student. The fact that he'd already extrapolated graduate student into a functional cover story in under 30 seconds was both impressive and deeply, deeply alarming. I looked at Jaehyun, who was watching the exchange with that careful attentiveness he wore like a second layer. I looked at Yuchan, who was already on his phone, presumably doing something efficient and slightly terrifying. I have one condition, I said. Taiju raised an eyebrow. Just one. It was a very controlled, very alpha eyebrow raise that communicated significant skepticism without a single word. Food, I said. I haven't eaten since this morning. If I'm staying here, I need actual food, not a protein bar from a tactical supply shelf. Real food, something warm. A pause. Then Jae-hyun stood up from the sofa, stretched his arms above his head with complete casualness, and said, "I'll handle it." Taiju looked at him. "Jae-hyun, he's hungry and he helped us." Jae-hyun shrugged, already moving toward the stairs. "The least we can do is feed him. Also, I want ramyun, and I'm using this as an excuse." He disappeared down the stairs without waiting for a response. I watched him go. Then I looked back at Taiju. "Is he always like that?" "Unfortunately," Taiju said, and the word carried the specific exhausted fondness of someone who had been saying unfortunately about the same person for years and had made a complete peace with it. Yu-chan stood. "I'll coordinate the sweep report and pull the surveillance footage from the exterior cameras. If they had eyes on the building tonight, we'll find the feed source." He said this to Taiju, then glanced at me briefly. "Don't touch anything on this floor without gloves fully on." That's genuinely good advice, and I resent that I needed to be told. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the structural suggestion of one, the way a building has the suggestion of a window before the frame goes in. Then he was gone, moving down the corridor with that precise, contained energy that seemed to be his permanent setting, which left me alone with Taiju. The room felt different with just the two of us in it. Not smaller exactly, more concentrated, like the air had decided to take sides and it had picked his. He moved to the city map on the table and studied it with his hands clasped behind his back. And I watched him for a moment because I was 22 years old and human, and he was objectively a lot to look at. And then I looked at the window instead because I had priorities, and they did not include developing complicated feelings about a pack alpha who had just told me I couldn't leave. "The man I saw," I said quietly, "on his knees. Was he one of yours?" Taiju was still for a moment. "Yes." "Is he okay?" Another pause. Longer. "He's alive." The way he said alive carried the weight of everything the word wasn't covering. I didn't push it. Some truths were better read than spoken, and I already knew I'd get the rest if I touched the right surface, which I wasn't going to do, because I had rules. The heating unit clicked again. His scent shifted slightly, something underneath the cedar wood loosening just a fraction, the way wood does in warmth. "Your ability," he said, not turning from the map. "Does it hurt?" The question landed unexpectedly. I blinked. "Sometimes. Depends on the emotional intensity of what's stored. Tonight was a 7 out of 10. The migraine usually fades within an hour." He turned then, looked at me directly. "You came to warn us anyway." "I wasn't going to just walk away." "Most people would." "Most people's fingertips don't get assaulted by architectural trauma," I said. "I have a vested interest in resolving situations quickly." He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted into a register I couldn't quite name. Not soft, not hard. Something in between that felt strangely like the beginning of a question he hadn't decided to ask yet. Then Jae-hyun's voice floated up from the floor below. "Ramyun is ready. Someone come hold the pot. This handle is a liability." Taiju closed his eyes briefly. "Open them." "Come," he said to me, and moved toward the stairs. I stood, pulled my gloves more firmly onto my hands, and followed the pack alpha of the Kang pack toward a kitchen that smelled like warm broth and something dangerously close to safety, which was, I already knew, the most dangerous thing in this building. The kitchen was on the 3rd floor. That surprised me. The whole building had presented itself as purely operational from the outside. All blacked out windows and silent men, and the specific energy of a place that conducted serious business and nothing else. But the kitchen was warm. Actually warm, not just heated, warm in the way that meant someone cooked here regularly, that meals happened here, that this building had a life inside it beyond whatever happened in that map room downstairs. Jae-hyun was standing at the stove looking deeply betrayed by a pot handle that had apparently loosened itself at a critical moment. He'd found an oven mitt from somewhere and was holding the pot with the careful energy of someone diffusing something. "Crisis averted," he announced as we entered. "Mostly." "You could have just used the mitt from the beginning," I said. "I didn't know where it was from the beginning." He set the pot on the counter with a satisfied thud and looked at me. Spicy or original? Spicy, obviously. He grinned. It was a very good grin, the kind that rearranged his whole face and made him look younger and significantly more like someone whose company you'd actively seek out. I filed that observation under noted irrelevant, moving on. The kitchen table was plain wood, wide enough for six, scarred with the kind of marks that accumulated over years of actual use. I sat down and pulled off my coat, draping it over the back of the chair. My gloves stayed on. They always stayed on in unfamiliar spaces. Taiju sat across from me. He didn't make a production of it, didn't arrange himself or signal anything. He just sat, forearms on the table, and watched Jae-hyun with the patient expression of a man who had watched Jae-hyun cook approximately 100 times before and had accepted all associated risks. Jae-hyun set a bowl in front of me. Steam rose from it in slow, generous curls. The smell hit first, rich and spiced and deeply, personally offensive to how hungry I was. I picked up the chopsticks without ceremony and ate, because I had passed the point of performing composure about basic biological needs. It was excellent ramyun. I didn't say that out loud because I had some dignity left. Yuchan appeared in the kitchen doorway about 4 minutes later. He looked at the pot on the counter, then at Jae-hyun, then sat down at the table with the efficiency of someone who had already processed the emotional landscape of the situation and decided ramyun was the correct response. Jae-hyun served him without being asked. We ate in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable silence, the kind that had texture to it, that meant people were thinking rather than avoiding. Outside, the wind had picked up off the water, and I could hear it moving against the building's upper floors. That specific Busan sound that I'd grown up with and never quite stopped noticing. The surveillance footage, Yuchan said, setting his chopsticks down. There was a secondary camera, not ours, mounted on the building across the street, disguised as a utility fixture. It had a direct sight line to our exterior entrance. The ramyun suddenly tasted less exceptional. How long has it been there? Taiju asked. Based on the mount oxidation, at least 3 weeks. Yuchan looked at me briefly. You were on it. Approximately 40 seconds of footage from the moment you touched the wall to the moment you went inside. 40 seconds. 40 seconds of my face, my coat, my gloved hands, my building reading, my whole catastrophic banana milk detour, all recorded and presumably already transmitted to whoever had planted that trap upstairs. Can you pull my identity from 40 seconds? I asked. I needed to know the scope. With the right facial recognition software and access to university databases? Yes, Yuchan said, within a few hours. I set my chopsticks down, pressed my gloved hands flat against the table, took one slow breath through my nose and processed the full shape of the situation I was in. Graduate student, registered Omega. Psychometric ability completely undocumented in any official system because I had spent 4 years making absolutely sure of that. Name, face, university affiliation, home address, all potentially accessible, all because of 40 seconds and a broken zipper and a closed convenience store. Tell me about the trap, I said. What was behind the door? Taiju looked at me. That's not your concern. It became my concern when my face ended up on a surveillance camera. I said evenly. I'm not asking for pack intelligence. I'm asking for context. There's a difference. A pause. Jae-hyun looked at Taiju. One of those silent conversations again, fast and complete. Taiju said, a pressure device, triggered by the door handle, designed to look like a contained event, but the blast radius would have taken the entire second floor. The entire second floor. That room, I said carefully. Was someone supposed to be in it tonight? Specifically? Something shifted in Taiju's scent, sharp and dark, moving under the cedar wood like a current under ice. Yes. You, I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I sat with that. The full picture assembled itself in my mind with the quiet, terrible clarity of a translation resolving into meaning. Someone had wanted Taiju specifically, had known enough about this building, this floor, this room, to plant something professional and timed, had set external surveillance to confirm the outcome. and had instead gotten footage of an unknown Omega pressing his fingertips to a wall and ruining the whole plan. I looked at Taiju across the table, at the man who had just told me I couldn't leave, at the Pack Alpha who was sitting here eating ramyun with absolute composure while someone somewhere in Busan was presumably very unhappy about a failed assassination. Okay, I said. Okay? Jaehyun raised an eyebrow. Okay, I understand the situation more completely now and I'm not leaving tonight. Not because you told me I couldn't, but because I'm not actually an idiot and walking out into a city where someone has my face on a camera seems like a genuinely poor choice. I picked my chopsticks back up. But I want it on record that this is my decision. Taiju watched me. Noted. And I want proper gloves, full coverage, no fingertip gap. If I'm staying in an unfamiliar building overnight, I need them. I'll find some, Jaehyun said immediately. And I want to know their names, I added, looking at Taiju. The men who work this building. Not ranks, names. If I'm going to be here, I'm not going to spend the whole time being contextualized at by people I can't identify. Yu-chan made that almost smile again. More visible this time. Barely, but more. Taiju said, agreed. And then, because the universe has a specific kind of humor that I've never fully appreciated, his phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. Something in his face went very still in a way that was distinct from his usual stillness, the difference between a calm sea and a frozen one. He stood, looked at Yu-chan. They know he's here. Yu-chan was already moving. Jaehyun set his bowl down slowly and looked at me across the table with those warm, careful eyes and said quietly, Jiyeon, stay close to one of us, starting now. The wind hit the building again outside. Harder this time, and somewhere below us, I heard the front door open. The front door opened and every single alpha instinct in that building activated simultaneously. I felt it before I heard it. The air pressure changed. The three distinct scents around me sharpened from warm and present to something focused and directional, the way a candle flame narrows right before it goes out. Taiju moved first, already heading for the door. Yu-chan was half a step behind him, phone at his ear, voice dropped to something clipped and rapid. Jaehyun put himself between me and the kitchen entrance, with a casualness that was entirely deliberate. Stay here, he said. I heard the door, Yeon, I said. Who has access to this building? Pack members and cleared personnel only. And if someone just walked in who isn't either of those things, Jaehyun looked at me steadily, then Taiju handles it. I believed him completely and found it only mildly comforting. I stayed in my seat. I kept my gloved hands flat on the table. I listened. Voices downstairs. Two of them. Taiju's low register and someone else. Higher, faster, with the specific cadence of someone delivering information under pressure. Not a threat. A messenger. I sorted that out from the tone alone before the words became clear enough to parse. Then I heard a name. Han Minjae. I didn't know that name. But the way Taiju said it, two syllables dropped into the air like something heavy set down on a hard floor, told me everything about its weight. Jaehyun's jaw tightened. Barely. But I was sitting 3 feet away, and I'd spent 4 years reading micro-expressions as a survival mechanism, so I caught it. Who is Han Minjae? I asked. Jaehyun was quiet for a moment. In my experience, the length of that kind of quiet was directly proportional to the complexity of the answer. This one ran about 4 seconds, which meant complicated. Someone who used to be Pack, he said finally. Used to be. Past tense carrying present weight. I let it sit and didn't push because Taiju's footsteps were already coming back up the stairs, and whatever was about to happen would tell me more than Jaehyun carefully word-selecting in a kitchen. Taiju came through the door, looked at me, then at Jaehyun. Minjae confirmed the surveillance. Someone pulled Jiyeon's image within the last hour and ran it through a private recognition system. It returned a match. He paused. His graduate program registration. Name, department, listed home address. My home address. I kept my face entirely neutral through what I can only describe as a significant internal event. So they know where I live, I said. Yes. And they know I was here tonight. Yes. And they don't know what I am or what I can do. Taiju looked at me with those dark eyes. Not yet. I nodded once, filed everything. Then I said, tell me about Han Minjae, because his name just came up in connection with a surveillance breach and a failed trap in your building, and you said used to be pack, which is doing a lot of work as a descriptor. The kitchen went quiet, not the comfortable kind from earlier. This was the kind of quiet that forms around a truth that everyone in the room already knows, and no one has said out loud yet. Yuchan came back to the kitchen. He looked at Taiju. Taiju looked at me. Something passed between all three of them that I felt rather than saw, a collective decision being made in the span of a breath. Taiju pulled out the chair next to me and sat down, not across the table this time, next to me, close enough that his scent was immediate and specific, cedar wood and something darker underneath, something that I was beginning to identify as the particular note his scent produced when he was about to say something that cost him something to say. Minjae was our fourth, he said. Pack of 4, 18 months ago. He left. Left or was removed? A pause. Both. The circumstances were complicated. Complicated like disagreement or complicated like betrayal? Taiju looked at me directly. Complicated like we still don't fully know. That landed with a specific kind of weight. I sat with it. A pack of 4 down to 3, an unclear departure, and now a name surfacing in connection with an assassination attempt on the remaining pack alpha. You think he's connected to whoever planted the trap, I said. I think he confirmed your identity to someone tonight within an hour of the surveillance footage being captured, Taiju said, which means he either has access to the same private recognition system or he was already working with whoever does. Or, Yuchan said quietly from the doorway, he was given the footage directly. The implication was cold and clear. Someone had sent Minjae the footage intentionally, which meant Minjae was not a coincidence. He was a component. I looked at Taiju, at the careful, controlled way he was holding himself, at the specific stillness that I was learning meant he was managing something large and difficult behind that composed exterior. And without meaning to, without deciding to, I reached a conclusion that bypassed logic entirely and came from somewhere more instinctive. He was hurt by this, not operationally, personally. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Taiju looked at me. The surprise was small but real. What? About Minjae. Whatever happened with him. I'm sorry it's connected to tonight. I wasn't performing sympathy. I genuinely meant it. There was something about the way all three of them had gone careful around that name that spoke of old damage. The kind that doesn't announce itself but shapes everything around it. Taiju was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was the same even register it always was. But underneath it something had shifted, loosened slightly, the way a locked room feels different when someone is standing inside it. You don't know anything about it, he said. No, I agreed. But I know what it looks like when a name still hurts. I don't need to touch anything to read that. The silence that followed was different from all the others. Jiyeon was looking at the table. Yuchan had gone very still in the doorway. And Taiju was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him yet. Not assessing, not commanding, not calculating, just looking. The way a person looks when someone has said something true that they weren't prepared for. Then his hand moved. Slow and deliberate across the table toward mine. Not grabbing, not claiming, just placing his hand over my gloved one. A single point of contact, warm and steady. I looked down at it, looked up at him. You're staying, he said. Not because I'm telling you to, because it's the only option that keeps you safe tonight. He paused. And because you were right, about the door, about all of it, and I don't ignore people who are right. It was not a declaration. It was not romantic. It was the straightest, most direct thing anyone had said to me in recent memory, and it hit somewhere quiet and unguarded that I hadn't realized was still open. Fine, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. But I'm telling my roommate I'm alive by midnight, or I will find a way to make your evening significantly more complicated. Jiyeon made a sound into his ramyun bowl. Yuchan turned and walked back down the corridor, but not before I caught the full version of that almost smile. And Taiju's hand stayed where it was, warm and certain over mine, for exactly 3 more seconds before he pulled it back and stood. 3 seconds. I felt every single one of them long after his hand was gone. The warmth of it stayed on my glove like a print, like residue, like the kind of thing my ability would have picked up and translated into something specific if the leather hadn't been between us. I was genuinely grateful for the leather. Taiju was already moving, back into operational mode. The brief human moment folded away with the efficiency of someone who had long practice at that particular skill. He spoke quietly to Yuchan in the doorway. Jaehyun collected the bowls from the table with the easy domesticity of someone performing a familiar routine. And I sat in the warm kitchen of a packed building I'd walked into an hour ago and tried to locate my sense of equilibrium. It had apparently stepped out. "Guest room is on the 4th floor," Jaehyun said, setting the bowls in the sink. "I'll show you up. We keep spares stocked. Clothes, toiletries, the basics. You keep guest rooms stocked regularly?" "Pack this size, pack business this complicated, yes." He glanced at me with that warm, direct attention. "It's not as ominous as it sounds. It sounds like infrastructure for detaining people. It's infrastructure for housing people during complicated situations." He paused. "Which is what this is." "The distinction is doing a lot of work there, Jaehyun." He smiled. "I know. Come on." I followed him up another set of stairs, narrower than the ones below, to a floor that felt distinctly different from the operational levels underneath. Quieter. The lighting was warmer. There were actual doors with actual handles and the faint, layered scent of habitation. 3 distinct alpha signatures woven into the walls and floors, with the comfortable permanence of people who live somewhere rather than work there. They lived here, or at least spent enough time here that the building had absorbed them. The guest room was at the end of the hall. Jaehyun opened the door, and I looked inside at a space that was plain and clean and entirely adequate. A bed with dark bedding, a window with the blinds drawn, a small attached bathroom, and a wardrobe that Jaehyun opened to reveal folded clothes in various sizes. "Should be something that fits," he said. "The glove," he added, moving to the small desk in the corner and opening the top drawer. "We had these." He held up a pair of thin black gloves, full coverage. No fingertip gap, the kind of technical fabric that was seamless at the seams. I stared at them. "Where did you get those?" "Yuchan ordered them about 20 minutes ago. Express delivery from a specialist supplier 3 blocks over. They run an all-night service." I took the gloves from his hand very carefully, not touching his fingers. Looked at them. The fabric was the exact weight and coverage I used on high-contact days. The kind that cost twice what standard gloves cost and required a specific search to find. Yuchan had found them in 20 minutes. Something shifted in my chest that I was not going to examine in front of Jaehyun. "Tell him thank you," I said. "Tell him yourself. He'll be up in a few minutes." Jaehyun leaned against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets, looking at me with that open, considering expression. "Can I ask you something?" "You've been asking me things since I got here." "A different kind of thing." I sat on the edge of the bed. "Fine." "The ability," he said. "When you touched the wall tonight, you said it was a 7 out of 10. What does a 10 feel like?" The question landed unexpectedly, not because it was invasive, but because it was the first time anyone had asked about the experience itself rather than the output. Most people, the few who knew, asked what I saw, not what it felt like to see it. I looked at my original gloves still on my hands. "Like drowning in someone else's worst moment," I said. "Full immersion, no distance. You don't observe it, you live it. And then you surface and you're back in your own body and everything feels thin for a while. Like the walls between you and everything else got worn down." Jaehyun was quiet for a moment. "That sounds exhausting." "It's manageable, most of the time. But not always." "No," I said. "Not always." He nodded slowly. "Not with pity, which I appreciated, but with the specific attentiveness of someone genuinely filing information rather than performing sympathy. Get some rest if you can. Things will move fast tomorrow." He straightened from the doorframe. "And Jiyeon." I looked up. "You were brave tonight. Genuinely." He said it simply, without decoration, and then he was gone, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. I sat there for a moment. Then I changed into a borrowed sleep shirt that was 3 sizes too large and smelled faintly of unfamiliar laundry detergent, switched to the new gloves, and was in the process of deciding whether I was actually capable of sleeping when the door opened. Not Jaehyun, Yuchan. He stood in the doorway with the contained, precise energy that seemed to follow him everywhere, holding a glass of water and what looked like a small blister pack of painkillers. He crossed the room, set both on the nightstand, and straightened. For the migraine, he said. I looked at the painkillers, then at him. How did you know it was still going? You've been pressing 2 fingers to your left temple at irregular intervals since you sat down in the map room. He said it with complete matter-of-factness, like this was ordinary observational data and not evidence that he had been watching me closely enough to track a repeated micro-gesture across multiple hours. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said, "Thank you for the gloves." Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically. He didn't have a dramatic register, but something settled, like a question had been answered. "They're the right specification," he said. "They are. How did you know the specification?" "You described the design flaw in your current ones. Fingertip exposure. The natural solution is seamless full coverage in a technical fabric light, enough not to impede sensation." He paused. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't complicated. He'd sourced custom psychometry gloves at midnight in 20 minutes because it wasn't complicated. I was staring at him. I became aware that I was staring at him and redirected my gaze to the water glass. "The situation with Minjae," I said quietly, because the name was still sitting in the room from earlier, and I needed to understand it if I was going to be useful tomorrow. "What do you need from me?" Yuchan looked at me for a long moment. In that look was a calculation I could feel happening in real time, the assessment of how much truth to extend to someone who was still technically a stranger. Then he said, "There's an object. Minjae left something behind when he left the pack. We kept it. We need to know if it carries anything useful." He paused. "We didn't have anyone who could read it, until now." The full shape of it opened up in front of me. Why they hadn't sent me home the moment the threat level clarified. Why Taiju had said your place is here with that specific certainty. The gloves, the room, the ramyun. I was useful. And the worst part, the part that hit me quietly in the chest, while Yuchan stood there with his careful dark eyes and his midnight-sourced gloves, was that I didn't feel used. I felt needed, which was so much more dangerous. "Show me the object," I said. Yuchan looked at me steadily. "Tomorrow, when you've rested." "I'm fine. Your migraine disagrees." I opened my mouth, closed it. He was right, and we both knew it, and arguing would be purely performative. "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow." He nodded once, moved toward the door. Then he stopped, hand on the frame, back still to me. "The ability," he said quietly. "We won't use it without your consent. Not once. That's not a negotiation. That's a guarantee." I stared at his back. "Taiju wanted me to make sure you knew that," he added. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, pressed the new gloves against my palms, and thought about a pack alpha who made guarantees through proxies at midnight because he had correctly identified that I needed to hear it. The cedarwood scent drifted faintly under the door. I closed my eyes. And that was when I heard it, a voice downstairs. Not Taiju's, not Jaehyun's. Not any of the building's regular personnel whose patterns I'd already begun to map. Sharp, familiar, and pointed with the specific edge of someone who had been let in because they used to belong here. Han Minjae had come to the building himself, and from the tone of what erupted below me 2 seconds later, he had not come to apologize. Han Minjae had not come to apologize. I lay still for exactly 4 seconds, ceiling above me, borrowed sheets beneath me, new gloves warm on my hands. Then the voice downstairs rose another register, and I was on my feet before I made a conscious decision to be. I was not going to stand in a guest room and listen to a situation unfold that directly involved me. That was not something I was capable of. My roommate Do-hyun called it my catastrophic hero complex. I preferred the term active information gathering. I opened the door quietly and moved to the top of the staircase. The voices were coming from the second-floor map room. The door was partially open, light spilling into the corridor in a narrow yellow strip. I went down one floor and stopped at the edge of that strip, back against the wall, and listened. Minjae's voice was the one I didn't recognize yet. It was younger than I expected, not in age necessarily, but in register, with the specific pitch of someone running hot on emotion and trying to sound controlled and failing slightly at the edges. You had no right to keep him here, he was saying. He's a civilian, an Omega with no PAC affiliation and no involvement in PAC business. Keeping him in this building overnight is a designation violation, and you know it. His safety is compromised. Taiju's voice, flat, immovable. His address was pulled within an hour of the surveillance capture. Sending him home is not a viable option. So find him a safe house. There are 3 on rotation. Move him out and let him go. Minjae, Jaehyun's voice quieter. Why are you here? Because someone sent me a message telling me an unaffiliated Omega walked into this building tonight and didn't leave. And I came to make sure you weren't doing exactly what you're doing. Which is what? Yuchan this time, cool and precise. Using him. The 2 words landed hard. The same way you use everything that comes within range of being useful. I know how this works. I lived it for 3 years. Silence. It was a very specific silence. The kind that forms when something true and something unfair have been said in the same breath, and the people receiving it can't immediately separate them. I pressed my back against the wall and thought about what Yuchan had said 40 minutes ago in the guest room. We won't use it without your consent, not once. Taiju had wanted me to hear that, and now here was Minjae, former PAC, saying the exact opposite, and the question sitting in the middle of all of it was which version of this PAC was the true one. I stepped into the doorway. All 4 of them turned. Minjae was not what I expected. He was around my age, 22 or 23, with a face that had probably been open once and had learned to be careful since. He was lean, sharp-jawed, with eyes that moved fast and registered everything. His scent hit me even from the doorway. Omega, like me. And underneath the surface notes, something bruised and complicated that I recognized the way you recognize a chord in a minor key. He looked at me. I looked at him. You're the one they're keeping, he said. I'm the one who chose to stay, I said. There's a difference. Something moved across his face. Did they tell you that? That it's a choice? No, I told them. After I declined to leave when the threat assessment made walking out genuinely stupid. I stepped fully into the room. I'm Seo Jiyeon. You're Han Minjae. You used to be in this PAC and now you're standing here at... I glanced at the clock on the wall. 12:40 in the morning, which means someone sent you that message about me specifically to get you through that door. Minjae stared at me. Who sent it? I asked. His jaw tightened. I don't know. Unknown contact? Encrypted message. No return trace. I looked at Taiju. He was watching me with that expression I was beginning to map. The one where I had done something he hadn't predicted, and he was recalibrating. I looked back at Minjae. Then you were used to get in here. Someone knew you'd come if you thought an unaffiliated Omega was being detained. They use that instinct. I paused. Which means they know you well enough to predict your behavior. And they knew you still had access to this building. The color shifted in Minja's face. Not dramatically, but the sharp, hot certainty he'd walked in with developed a crack. The door code hasn't changed, Taiju said quietly. Behind the words was something I could hear without psychometry, something old and unresolved. He hadn't changed the code. After everything, whatever everything was, he hadn't changed it. Minjae heard it too. His throat moved. I'm not here for that conversation, he said. I know, Taiju said. I came for him. He nodded at me. To make sure he was okay. I'm okay, I said. I've been fed. I have appropriate gloves, and I have a room with a door that locks from the inside. I checked. I had checked. But I need you to sit down and tell me everything you know about whoever sent you that message. Because they also set a trap in this building tonight that was meant for Taiju. And your name came up in the same conversation as the surveillance footage of me. Which means, whether you intended it or not, you're inside this situation. Minjae looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Taiju, then back at me. You've been here 2 hours, he said. Hour and a half, approximately. And you're already running the debrief. Someone has to. I gestured at the chairs. Sit down, please. He sat, slowly with the specific reluctance of someone whose instinct was to leave, but whose sense of responsibility had voted otherwise. Taiju sat. Jaehyun and Yuchan took their positions with the ease of long practice, and I pulled up a chair, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at Han Minjae with the full attention of someone who had spent 4 years reading the emotional residue of everything they touched and had learned, above everything else, to identify the difference between a person who was dangerous and a person who was damaged. Minjae was damaged. I knew it within 30 seconds of being in the same room. "Start with why you left the pack," I said. The room went very still. "That's not relevant," Minji said. "It's the most relevant thing in the room. Someone used your attachment to this pack and your protective instinct toward omegas to walk you through that door tonight. That means they knew your history, which means your history is the thread." I held his gaze. "I'm not asking for drama. I'm asking for information." Minjae looked at Taiju. Something passed between them, raw and unfinished and old enough to have scar tissue over it. "Tell him," Taiju said quietly. Minjae's hands flat on the table, pressed down once, hard. Then he said, "I left because someone told me Taiju had authorized a move against an Omega safe house on the east side. Civilian shelter, 14 residents." His voice was careful and controlled in the way that meant neither of those things. I believed it. I confronted him. He denied it. I didn't believe the denial. He paused. I was wrong. The last 3 words fell into the room like stones. "The authorization was forged," Yuchan said. "We found that 8 months after Minjae left. Someone inside the opposing network fabricated documentation with Taiju's credentials, specifically to fracture the pack." It worked, I thought, but didn't say. "8 months," I said instead. "And you've been apart for 18. Neither Taiju nor Minjae answered. 10 months of knowing the truth, and this much distance still between them. I looked at Taiju's face, at the thing he was holding very carefully behind those steady dark eyes. I looked at Minjae, at the open wound he was trying to cover with sharp edges. This was the shape of it. The trap tonight wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was the second act of a play that had started 18 months ago. Break the pack, remove the 4th member, then finish what the fracture started. "The object," I said, turning to Yuchan. "The one Minjae left behind. I need to read it tonight." Yuchan looked at Taiju. Taiju looked at me. "You said tomorrow. Your migraine is a 4 out of 10 now, and the situation has changed." I pulled the new gloves tighter over my fingers. "Whoever sent Minjae here tonight knows he made contact. They'll move faster now. I need the object." A beat of silence. Then Taiju stood, and without a word walked to the cabinet on the far wall, opened the lower drawer, and placed something on the table in front of me. A watch, plain, silver-banded, with a small scratch on the face that looked deliberate. Minjae's breath caught. He recognized it immediately. I looked at it, looked at Taiju. "This was the object you kept," I said. "Yes," Taiju said quietly. And the way he said it, the specific weight of that one syllable, told me everything about why he'd kept it. He'd kept it because letting go of it meant letting go of something he wasn't ready to release. I reached out, pressed 2 fingers to the watch face, and the room disappeared. Not gradually, not like falling asleep or losing focus. It disappeared the way a light goes out, complete and instant, and something else rushed in to fill the space. Cold, the first thing. Bone-deep cold. The specific kind that comes from standing outside in January without a coat because you left in a hurry, because you were angry, because someone said something that cracked the ground beneath your feet and you needed to move before you fell through it. I was not myself. That was always the disorienting part of a deep read. The first few seconds where the psychometry pulled me so completely into the stored emotion that my own edges blurred. I knew in the part of my mind that stayed tethered that I was sitting at a table in a map room in Mappa district with 4 men watching me touch a watch. But the rest of me was standing on a bridge over the Han River 18 months ago in January cold, and the hands I was looking at were not mine. Minja's hands. Younger feeling, shaking slightly. The watch was in them. He was holding it over the railing, not to drop it, just holding it there, over the dark water, feeling the weight of the decision. The emotional residue stored in the metal was extraordinary in its density, layered the way old wood is layered. Ring after ring of feeling compressed into something small and holdable. I felt 18 months of his life hit me in sequence. The confrontation, the words that couldn't be unsaid, the door of the pack building closing behind him, the weeks of silence, the specific agony of being wrong about something that cost you everything and not being able to go back. And underneath all of it, stored deepest, pressed closest to the metal, like the most fundamental layer. Not anger, not betrayal. Grief, pure and specific. The grief of someone who had loved his pack with the totality that Omegas love things when they allow themselves to, completely and without reservation, and had believed that love had been answered with a sanctioned attack on 14 innocent people. He had left because he loved them too much to stay and believe that of them. Then the vision lurched, shifted, the way psychometric reads sometimes did when an object had been touched by more than one person with significant emotional charge. The cold of the bridge dissolved. New scene. Different hands. Different emotional signature entirely. These hands were picking the watch up from a surface, not the table in the map room. Somewhere else, somewhere with fluorescent lighting and the smell of cigarettes and a specific ambient tension that made my stomach tighten with recognition I couldn't immediately source. The hands turned the watch over, examined the scratch on the face, the deliberate one, the one I had noticed before I touched it. And the emotion stored in this layer of the reading was not grief. It was satisfaction. Whoever this was, they had made that scratch intentionally. They had handled this watch, this specific personal object, and felt satisfied while doing it, like marking something, like signing something. I pushed deeper into the red, against the migraine that was now a genuine 6 and climbing, reaching for the face, for anything identifying, for a name or a feature or a location that would surface and become useful. I got a reflection, partial, the fluorescent light above catching in a window behind the hands, and in that window, the ghost of a face looking back. I knew that face, not personally, but I had seen it tonight, in the building, downstairs. One of the men who had stood in the corridor during the initial sweep, positioned near the second floor, someone I had registered and filed as pack personnel and moved past. The satisfaction in the emotional residue pulsed once, hard, and then I was back. The map room, the table, the watch under my fingers, 4 men watching me with varying degrees of visible tension. Jae-hyun leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, Yu-chan standing with his arms crossed and his eyes very focused, Minji gripping the edge of the table without seeming to realize he was doing it, and Taiju standing closest, who had moved to my side of the table at some point during the read, close enough that his scent was the first thing that anchored me back to myself. Cedarwood and that dark current underneath, present and immediate and real. I pulled my fingers back from the watch, pressed both hands flat against the table, took one breath, then another. Jiyeon, Taiju's voice, low and careful, right beside me. What did you see? I looked at the watch, at the scratch on the face, at the small, deliberate mark that someone had made while feeling satisfied, while feeling like they had signed something. Minjae didn't make the scratch, I said. The room shifted. I felt it without looking up. What? Minjae's voice. This scratch was made by someone else. After you left the watch here, someone picked it up, examined it, and marked it. I finally looked up, looked at Taiju. Someone in this building, tonight. Someone I saw in the corridor during the sweep. Taiju went very still, the particular stillness of a man who had just heard the floor open beneath him and had not yet decided how to fall. Describe him, Yu-chan said, and his voice had dropped to something I hadn't heard from him before. Flat and sharp simultaneously, like a blade laid on a table. I described him. Height, build. The specific way he had stood in the corridor, the position he'd held near the second floor, the fluorescent reflection. I watched the description land on Taiju's face like weather moving across a landscape. That's Byung-hoon, Jae-hyun said quietly. The warmth in his voice was completely gone. He's been with us for 2 years. 2 years. Long enough to know the building, long enough to know the door codes, the rotation schedules, the layout of the second floor. Long enough to know that Minjae would come if the right message was sent. Long enough to know exactly which room Taiju used. Long enough to plant something and wait. Taiju turned toward the door. Taiju! My voice came out steadier than I felt. He stopped. I stood up from the chair, migraine burning behind my left eye, borrowed clothes too large, new gloves tight on my hands. The emotional residue in the watch, the layer from Byung-hun. I paused. He wasn't acting alone. What I felt was satisfaction, not ambition, not personal, professional. Someone is directing him. Taiju looked at me over his shoulder. Those dark eyes in this light, at this hour, with everything that had unraveled in the last 2 hours laid out between us, held something that made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the psychometric hangover. I know, he said quietly. Then you know who. A pause. The heating unit clicked. The wind moved against the upper floors. Minjae made a sound that was not quite a word. Taiju turned fully to face me, crossed the distance between us in 3 steps. Stopped close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to hold his gaze. Close enough that the cedar wood was immediate and specific, and the dark current underneath it was fully present, no longer hidden. He reached up slowly. His hand came to rest at the side of my face, not grabbing, not tilting, just resting, warm and certain, the way his hand had rested over my glove at the kitchen table, but closer now, more direct, more honest. My heart did something I was choosing not to name. The person directing Byung-hun, he said quietly, low enough that it was almost only for me, has been working toward the destruction of this pack for 3 years, has been inside our trust, our structure, our history, has been patient enough to wait. His thumb moved slightly against my cheekbone. One small motion. And tonight, he did not account for you. I searched his face. Who is it? Taiju's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes, heavy and specific. The look of a man about to say the name of something that will change the shape of everything once spoken aloud. His mouth opened, and the lights went out. Complete darkness. Instant and total. The whole building dropping at once. The warm glow of the map room and the corridor lights and the city-filtered shine through the windows all extinguished simultaneously. In the darkness, Taiju's hand was still against my face. In the darkness, from somewhere below us, I heard a door. Not opening. Being opened. The specific sound of a lock giving way to someone who knew exactly how to move through a building they had studied for 2 years. Taiju's hand dropped from my face. I felt him shift, felt the air change as he moved. Then his voice, right at my ear, barely a breath. Don't make a sound. A heartbeat of silence. Then from directly below us, a voice I didn't recognize spoke 2 words in the dark. 2 words that made Minjae inhale sharply beside me. 2 words that made Yuchan go completely, unnaturally still. 2 words that made Jae-hyun, who had smiled through everything tonight, stop smiling entirely. I didn't know the name yet, but I felt the room recognize it like a wound recognizing the instrument that made it. And in the darkness, with cedar wood still warm in the air around me, and 4 men breathing in concentrated silence, and the building holding its breath beneath us, one thought moved through me with the cold clarity of a psychometric read. Whoever had just walked through that door knew exactly where we were. And he had been waiting for this moment for 3 years, and that was where everything stopped. The footsteps below us went still, 1 floor down, waiting, patient in the way that only someone who had been planning this for years could be patient. Taiju's hand was still close to my face in the darkness, still trembling at the edges. The most powerful alpha in this building, shaking over a name he hadn't said yet. A name everyone in this room recognized except me. I pressed my new gloves against my palms and waited. Because some truths don't live in objects. They live in the space between people who haven't spoken them yet. The name was coming. The door below was about to open. And nothing, not one single thing, was ever going to be the same after it did. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. That means everything. If this story had your heart racing and left you desperate for answers, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more interesting stories. See you in the next.